Please stand by while other people join. Thanks. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining. Today is December 9, 2020, and it is the last session of our UTDT Global Tax Talks. We are today with no guests, just Celina and I. We are going to provide a sum up of our sessions, a short sum up of our sessions, as well as our conclusions. Our purpose is to comply with the 3 C's, to be clear, concise, and correct of what the 13 previous speakers have said during this almost 4-month-long webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on the international tax system. Good morning, Celina. How are you?
Good morning, Leandro. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining to this last and concluding session.
Before starting with the conclusion, just let's make a brief sum up of what we have done. This series started actually as a one conference seminar that would have been held in presence back in March with Professor Ruben Avillona. Unfortunately, because of COVID, he could not come to Argentina. But and the topic would have been very much different. But because of COVID, we thought that it would be good to have the views of all the continents, if possible, on the same hard tax topic. And in this case, what we saw was that the pandemic was crystallizing certain issues. They were made patent in the international tax system. And as a result of that, we prepared a set of questions that was sent to all the speakers in advance to have their views. And today, what we are going to do is to sum up their views and give their conclusions, as I said before. So, Celina?
Yes, thank you. So, overall, the talks that we have heard during the last month, it is quite clear that there are 5 main issues which were common to all the lectures. These are the design of the international tax system, transfer pricing, wealth tax, distribution of tax revenue, and taxpayer viewpoint. So we can start with the first issue. So my question to Leandro is related to the design of the international tax system. What are the main conclusions on this issue? Leandro, please, could you explain?
Yes, what we have seen from the beginning is that there is a consensus among all the scholars and the global tax policy makers that have spoken to us that the rules of the current international tax system are some kind of ancient, okay? That they need some refreshment. They have to be refurbished, okay? First of all, we have the concept of PE that needs to be revisited, okay? There is no physical presence in some cases, and the concept of a fixed place of business in some types of activities, this concept has become redundant. Okay, so it is needed to have a revision of the concept of the nexus, and that's something that the OECD is working with in the inclusive framework, with the inclusive framework to reach a consensus on the new tax rules to have all the economy taxed correctly and in a fair way. Okay, and in that case, what we have seen is that we have heard many speakers speaking about the need to recognize tax jurisdiction to the markets. Okay, so in this case, and that's the way Pillar 1 of the OECD is going to, is to give more tax jurisdiction to the source country. Okay, and but at the same time, what some scholars, such as Professor Ruhlfeld and Professor Stewart, mentioned during their talks with us, is that providing taxing jurisdiction or granting taxing jurisdiction to market jurisdictions may also affect the current tax system for, let's say, brick and mortar, as Professor Tandem said, economies or activities, okay? In that case, for instance, extracting activities, such as mining, would market jurisdiction have a claim to tax the revenue from those activities just because they buy the iron? Okay, all these topics need to be reviewed and revisited, and I think that, and we think that the OECD, with the work of with the inclusive framework, is going in that direction. Mentioning that is that how this solution could be reached. We have mainly three ways, as Professor Herson said. There are unilateral solutions, bilateral solutions, and multilateral solutions. The OECD is pushing, or is to obtain consensus among all the countries involved. Okay, and this is a very hard a very hard work for taxes, because, as we know, taxes is a political phenomenon as well. And at the same time, what we see is that there may be some type of solutions that may be bilateral. For instance, we have the UN model that has proposed an Article 12b to cover digital services taxes, okay, which, if imposed unilaterally, may end up with a trade war, okay, because what we are trying to balance in this, and the pandemic has made clear this, is that there must be some balance between the jurisdiction where the activity is performed and the jurisdiction where this activity is used. Okay, So in this case, what we all need to discuss is how this consensus is reached. So from this point of view, just to summarize, the rules that we are using or we are working with so far, they need some adjustment. And it is not minimal adjustment, but it needs substantial adjustment. There must be some recognition of the market jurisdictions. But at the same time, this recognition should make some distinction as to certain activities, perhaps, that if the consumer is recognized some value in this chain, there must be some type of compensation for those countries where physical assets are still being produced, basically raw materials, which in certain ways it's where developing countries are, or these raw materials are produced mainly in developing countries. Okay, so it is necessary to reach some balance on this matter, and to obtain a good balance, it is necessary to enter into political interaction. Okay, and perhaps this pandemic, as the 2008-2009 financial crisis, is an opportunity to obtain this type of consensus, to move ahead on a fair international tax system where revenues are shared among all participants. Celina, do you have any views on this?
I agree with you, Leandro. Thank you.
No, thank you. So at this point, I think that what we need to focus on a very specific topic of this issue of the international taxation, which is transfer pricing. Do you have some views to share, Celina, please?
Yes, of course. Yes, in connection with transfer pricing, I think that the conclusions can be broken down into 5 main ideas. The first one is the arm's length principle in the current economic downturn. For example, Professor Bajstroki said that due to this pandemic, the business economic conditions have changed dramatically. So he laid out certain challenges for transfer pricing rules. For example, what happened with limited entities and losses? Professor Valls, in this regard, stressed that limited risk does not necessarily mean no risk at all. And then Professor Bajstroki posed the following question: whether royalties and services payments should still be made, particularly if the contributor is going through financial difficulties. Which companies should bear the cost of business restructuring? How should government support or subsidies be treated? Should existing APAs be modified or suspended because of the dramatic change in circumstances? All are these kind of questions that now are new questions under this new situation. The second idea deals with the comparability analysis in this pandemic. Professor Yan Su remarked that comparable data showing how independent companies were affected by the pandemic will not be available until sometime in 2021. Then Professor Suranjali placed great emphasis on 2 issues that complicated the comparability analysis. These are the concentration of companies in certain sectors and the integration of operation. While Professor Su commented that location advantages and market premiums should also be considered in this comparability analysis. The third question is OECD guidelines. Some speakers were concerned about the application of current OECD guidelines to this new scenario. David Bradbury from the OECD said that Working Party number 6 is preparing some guidance that will help taxpayer and tax administration navigate some of these stormy waters that COVID-19 has presented. Fourthly, some possible approaches were put on the table. Some speakers proposed use the loss-making company as comparables that are normally not included, extend the period of analysis, use information from the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, but with certain cautious, since this crisis is not exactly the same as that of 2008. Use comparability adjustment and consider the use of force majeure clauses. On the other hand, Professor Yansu added to the debate suggested that clear governmental guidance on transfer prices would be beneficial, citing Australia as a good example. Then Professor Partoshon thought it would be a good idea to carry out a deep market search in every sector and come up with a realistic range and a list of safe harbor rules. And lastly, some speakers opened the chapter of flexible deviation from the arm's length standard. Professor Ruben Avillona drew our attention to the fact that when the OECD started the first BEPS project in 2012-2013, they couldn't hear of any deviation at all from the arm's length standard or from PE concept. But now, however, he believes that they are much open to this kind of suggestion. He also predicts that various countries might follow suit. So I think these are the main ideas regarding the issue of transfer pricing. So the next main issue that was around all these talks was about the wealth tax. So Leandro, what do you think which are the main conclusions about wealth tax?
Well, thank you for a very good summary, Celina, on transfer pricing, and let's discuss what's going on the individuals, okay? And the common thread that we have listened to is that there is a growing inequality in the society, in the global society, okay? And and that's why there are economists and scholars and tax policymakers discussing of the benefit of introducing a wealth tax in an economy. Okay, what we have heard is that, for instance, in the U.S. there is a proposal of Senator Warren of levying a 6% tax on net wealth. Okay, so basically no computation for debts. Okay, also Professor Scholm proposed a wealth tax on the super rich, and Professor Bajstroki was also mentioned that there was a need to have some equality in the economic system, and that perhaps a wealth tax might be a solution. At the same time, there were many scholars that said that perhaps a wealth tax may not be a solution. Okay, why is that? Because first of all, everybody agrees that, for instance, regarding the proposal of Professor Scholm, is that very low rate and very high thresholds. Okay, he said that the lowest rate would be 0.25%, 0.25%, for wealths above 5 million sterling pounds, which is approximately $7.5 million US dollars. Okay, so the question at this point is, what is the threshold? What is the rate for this wealth tax? And also, as I was saying before, some scholars say, and I think that also with reason, when they rightly, is that taxing wealth can also be achieved the same results by taxing the returns on that wealth. Okay, one question that we may have is, okay, what is an unproductive asset? Do we have to levy the wealth tax on all assets or just unproductive assets? What are unproductive assets? It's the wealth that is not within the economy. I mean, for instance, luxury goods, okay, or cash that is not within the financial system, okay, because the cash, it may be invested in some in some wealth, so the point that many scholars, Professor Rulefeld said that taxing wealth may not be the solution because it is another tax on the participants of the economy that provide employment, okay, that provide resources to the economy. But definitely, if there is inequality, one thing that global tax policy makers said, both the three of them, David Bradbury, Michael Keane, and Michael Leonard, is that more focus should be on taxing the revenues from that wealth, taxing capital income, okay, and also eliminating some tax expenditures, okay, on the wealthy, okay. We know that a few days ago, the OECD issued a report on the tax treatment of charitable donations, okay, charitable donations. So, and the third point I would say is that, and this was mentioned by Professor Stewart, is that there is an obligation, perhaps, on rich countries to help collect taxes, okay? Because we have the Multilateral Convention for Administrative Assistance, which has been signed by many countries, but most of the countries that signed and that have this agreement, this convention, in effect, they don't assist in the collection of taxes, okay? All these conclusions must also have something in mind, okay, which is not only wealthy people, but all people try to invest their savings in safe assets, and assets that provide safe return. So one thing that came up to my mind when I was preparing this draft of the question was, okay, what if all countries start levying a wealth tax? Okay, all countries around the world. In that case, wouldn't developing economies suffer as well? Because if developed economies start levying wealth taxes, to be fair, non-residents in those jurisdictions should also pay the wealth tax, okay? So in that case, the revenues for developing economies may be very scarce, which is the case currently as well. Wealth taxes don't raise much revenue, okay? So we have the example, for instance, in Argentina that we are living right now. Last Friday, a surtax on wealth has been created. It has not been signed into law yet, but we don't know the fate of this tax. And the problem with taxes on wealth is that the capital is mobile. And if tax administration or countries are too harsh and too aggressive with their taxpayers, perhaps not only the capital will be mobile, the individuals as well will move to, and this has been the evidence, for instance, in France, when they levied their wealth tax, many wealthy individuals left the country, okay? So, and when they leave, it is very likely that their wealth leaves and as well, and that they do not come back. So it is necessary to have this view also when when this type of taxes are considered. So this is my personal view, and based on what we have heard from all the speakers during these 13 dialogues. Celina, at this point, we have to move to the next, to the fourth, which is to the fourth topics that we have recognized, which is the distribution of tax revenues among countries. What are your views on this?
Thank you, Leandro. So here the main question is whether the current division of revenues among countries is fair or not. All the speakers agree that it's a very subjective question. Professor Avillona, for example, thought that the current system is not fair, backing his argument with the current tendencies of unilateral movements. Other speakers partially agree, pointing that is fair, but not for all. For example, she mentioned that studies have done across Africa to look at whether the PE concept, as we know it today, protected their taxing rights over their resources. She said that the answer was generally negative. Some speakers offer some explanation why the system is not fair. For example, Professor Jean explained that the current distribution of tax revenue is a consequence of global colonial past, since the capital ownership instead of value creation was the primary criterion for taxing revenue. However, he thought that the BERT project is challenging this deep-rooted concept, especially in the light of emerging economies in the G20, which sponsored the BEPS project. Professor Valls showed some concerns about Pillar 2. He thought that with Pillar 2, developing countries may be losing a part of their sovereign right to tax, because this sovereign also includes right not to tax, as is the case of tax-sparing clauses. The speakers come up with some possible approach to make the system more equitable. For example, Professor Hirson stressed the importance of the UN model since it represents a balance between developed and developing countries. Other speakers echoed that sentiment, saying that the solution may be Article 12A included in the UN model, since it provides a simple solution to tax services without the need of a PE in the source state. Professor Xu introduced an innovative approach of the concept of value generation. She stated that the value generation not only includes value creation, but also value realization. In other words, the value incorporated from the demand side when the sale has been completed. So that was very innovative. So I think that these are the main ideas around this concept of distribution of tax revenue. Now I think that we are in a position to move to our last main issue, which is the taxpayer viewpoint. Leandro, what do you think, which are the main conclusions around this subject?
I think that at this point, I'm going to stick to what Professor Leonard said in our last talk, which is there are many governments that have dealt with this pandemic very well, and some others that have not performed that well. Okay, so this may have an impact on the willingness of taxpayers to accept tax hikes. Okay, what we have seen is that the deficits in all economies will be great. I mean, it will be not great, it will be big, 10% to 16% of GDPs. Okay, there has been issuances of government debt, for sovereign debt, all around the world, and also governments had to resort to issuing, printing money. Okay, so at some point in time, this situation needs to be contained, and usually this would be through the raising taxes, raising the tax levels. But in this case, as long as the taxes are borne equitably, I mean, fairly among all the participants of the society. And one important point, I think that what we have stressed during these dialogues is that the members of the government, politicians, should also bear some type of cost in terms of adjusting their budgets, okay, and analyzing more carefully what they spend the tax revenues on, okay. If there are certain matters that need to be reviewed, and I think that this is something that it has not been properly analyzed so far, is how taxes should be spent, okay, to make a society fairer, and that's something to consider in the future as well. But in general terms, as I was saying at the beginning of this conclusion, Professor Leonard said it all depends on how the governments have reacted, and if there was clear leadership, that leadership will definitely or should not face problems in saying, okay, society, we need to raise taxes to bear the cost of this crisis that we have suffered. Okay, and having said that, I think that we have made a sum up. Perhaps it has not been the complete. In that case, we apologize for any errors which are our own to this, and I think that we have to pass to the next step of this final session, which is the time of saying thanks. Okay, so Celina, first of all, if you want to start with your thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, on behalf of UTDT, I would like to thank Eduardo Bastrocchi for his inspiration for the launching of the UTDT Global Tax Talk. Thank you, Eduardo. He is the author of this idea of the UTDT Global Tax Talk. And I would also like to thank Leandro Passarella, my colleague here, for his leadership and commitment to carry out this project. Thank you, Leandro, for your effort and commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celina. I also want to thank Eduardo. Eduardo, as Celina was saying, he was an inspiration. This was a discussion that we had late last year on the conference with Professor Avillona, and then because of this crisis, we decided to move forward, and he was very helpful, a very helpful resource to make this idea come true, to come to fruition. I also thank Celina, and in her, I thank Universidad Torquato de Itela for the opportunity to reach out to the world. We have spoken with 13 distinguished speakers at different times of the day, on different dates, and we have spoken with persons that are as far as 20,000 kilometers away from where we are. We have spent the last 9 months mainly in lockdown. In Argentina, the lockdown, or at least in the city of Buenos Aires, the lockdown has been lifted gradually in the last 3 weeks. And I would also like to thank 2 important people that have been in the backstage, that I would like for them to appear now, to turn their cameras on. Emiliano Lasagna and Elisa Lapola. Emiliano has been helping us with putting all these Zooms in place, and Elisa She was the one sending the emails with and inviting people to participate in the Zooms and the webinars and sending all the links. So without them in the rear guard, this would not have been possible, okay? Because we, Celina and I, have been up in the front, but without their help, this would not be possible. And personally, I would also like to thank my family, my wife, and my kids for this time. Without them and without their support, this would not have been possible, okay? We have shared time, we have shared bandwidth. My kids were in class at some point when I was on the talks. And one final word is that this has been the first of many UTDT Global Tax Talks series, hopefully. We plan to have a new set of talks next year. We are discussing the global tax topic to discuss next year so far, and we may need help on deciding on the topic. We have 2 or 3 topics already on file that we need to fine-tune, and hopefully we'll see you next year. And one final word, thanks, I was forgetting, I'm sorry. Thanks to all the speakers, the 13 speakers that have participated: Professor Ruben Avillona, Professor Pato Shon, Professor Andrés Baez Moreno, Professor Eduardo Baistrochi, Professor Martin Hirson, Professor Jennifer Ruhlfeld, Professor Suranjali Tandon, Professor Yang Shu, Professor Miranda Stewart, Professor Yangshen Zhu, Professor David Bradbury, Professor Michael Keane, and Professor Michael Lennon. Without your participation, these talks would not have been possible. Thanks for your willingness to participate. Having said that, I have nothing else to add. Celina?
Thank you, Leandro. I would like also to thank Martin Lavato, who is a student of the Master of Law, who helped preparing the draft for this concluding session. So thank you very, very much also for our audience. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes. Happy holidays. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.